What is up? What is going on, everybody? It has been a minute, but welcome back and welcome in. I keep wanting to say Mariners post-game recap, but those are not a thing anymore. We are into the off season officially, and no better person to bring on and discuss some Mariners off-season topics than MarinersSUR. He's going to join me today. We're going to talk. We're just going to go over some things that we had, about the 2024 season. We'll dive into maybe a little bit of some sleeper candidates that the Mariners could acquire this offseason. And we'll get this offseason kicked off the right way, hopefully with a good show for you all. As always, remember to like, comment, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new. Thanks for joining me, my friend. It's been a while. I don't think we've talked since, I think, that Astros series when the Mariners still had some hope. How you doing? How you feeling?
Yeah, it has been a while, but yeah, doing well. I think, like we said before the show, nice to have a little break from Mariners baseball, but excited to, I think, talk a little bit about the prior seasons and what's to come. And I'm to the point now where I'd love if Mariners baseball is back, but we got a ways to go. So the best we can do is just kind of talk about hope for 2025 at this point.
Yeah, I had the couple-week break. I needed it from the team. This was a draining season. I think it's something that all of us, kind of content creators talked about, and I know you have agreed with it as well. Just a very draining season for the Mariners. So I think we all kind of needed that, just a little bit of a break from them for a couple weeks. So, but yeah, I'm with you. We're in October now. Hey, spring training's in March. Holiday season will kind of get us there. And before we know, we'll come out of the holidays and pitchers and catchers will be reporting in a month. So it'll be here before we know it. I'm with you. I'm ready for baseball to be back. And the playoffs have kind of rejuvenated me a little bit. It's been an exciting playoffs. And I just, man, I don't know if you watched a little bit of that Yankees Guardians game.
I did.
But that kind of like those things like rejuvenate me because it just makes me excited for the Mariners to be in that spot. Is that kind of the same vibe you have watching these playoffs?
Agreed. Yeah, I think the playoffs have been, outstanding. Tons of just really good games, good series. And yeah, I did catch that Guardians Yankees game today. And yeah, pretty insane. Noel with a 2-run home run with 2 outs in the 9th, and then Fry with the walk-off home run. I think that was 2 outs as well in the 10th, if not 1. But yeah, I agree. These exciting games definitely rejuvenate me. And I think part of it too is, watching some of these teams in games is even looking like it's starting pitching that teams are running out. Man, I think if the Mariners were to get into the playoffs, and this is part of the rejuvenation, is I think their starting pitching would give them a good chance to make noise. So and it's kind of a double-edged sword. It makes it a little bit more frustrating, I think, and kind of hurtful that we didn't make it, but also just gets you kind of fired up for Mariners baseball to be back as well.
See, they got us. We're already bought back in. It took us 2 weeks of playoff baseball, and they got us hooked again. But no, I agree. I think you look at this rotation, and like you said, it's a double-edged sword. It's frustrating because, I really do. I think the team could have made some noise in the playoffs. Their starting pitching is good enough that, the offense was hot. And unfortunately, the first 3 months count. But, coming off September, they may even been good enough to go on a run here, but shoulda, woulda, coulda. The Mariners were not in the playoffs. It has been a great postseason. But what we're going to do for anybody, hopefully you guys all catched Jake from Raise the Trident, had a bunch of Mariners content creators on, went over some really fun questions. It was kind of a round table type thing. I had a lot of fun doing it despite my poor microphone volume during that. I was in a hotel room. So I'm going to be doing that with MarinersSUR. I'm going to be kind of dishing out the same questions that Jake dished out. If you guys are watching this, head over to Raise the Trident, hit subscribe on his channel. That stuff takes a lot of hard work and dedication to edit all that stuff and put it together. So definitely head over there and give Jake a sub. He is the man. So the first question that he asked was, and I'll ask this to you, which season was more disappointing for you, 2023 or 2024?
Yeah, I think for me, 2024 for a few reasons. I think, 2023 was frustrating in its own right, but coming off the playoffs in 2022, I think in the moment you were able to kind of chalk it up as, all right, it's just one season. We'll bounce back in 2024. I know even going into 2023, when you have guys like Tommy La Stella as opening day DH, to me, there was like some pretty apparent holes on the roster. And I think even at that point, we didn't really know about like Bryce Miller, Brian Wu, Robbie Ray got hurt in the first game of the season. And so to me, it just kind of early on, I think there was some like pretty obvious cracks in the roster that I think were concerning. But I think most importantly, just, we had that playoff run in 2022. So I think missing it for a second straight year was really tough to stomach. And then honestly, I thought the roster was a lot better. Mitch Garver hit cleanup for the World Series champions. We bring him in. He kind of fell on his face. Polanco has been a staple on the Twins, who have been, in the playoffs quite a bit while he's been there. So I just thought the roster was a lot better built. And then I think like coming out of the seasons in 2023, JP Crawford had a breakout year. You're excited about him. So I think for me, 2024, I leave with a little bit more maybe question marks, which makes it a little bit more frustrating because, JP struggled. Garver's going to be back on the roster. We're kind of still waiting to see if Julio can put it together for a full season. So I think just missing the playoffs for the 2 straight years, then also some more question marks, like with France being gone, some of those guys that you maybe thought were going to be core players that are now either gone or there's more question marks, makes it, I think, a little bit more frustrating, and also some uncertainty moving forward as well. So for me, it was definitely 2024, just kind of more pent up frustration for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point too, is, coming out of 2023, Julio kind of did something similar 23-24, where it was like some up and down play, then a really great month kind of carries it to a pretty solid season. And, 24 wasn't as good as 23 for him, but now, he kind of put as like an outlier in 23 for Julio, like, hey, it happens. But then he kind of does the same thing again in 24, where it's like really cold for a while. So now, like you said, we kind of have more questions, like, is Julio, is that just kind of what he is, where he's just that streaky, where it's going to be a couple good months to carry him? Like you said, JP has that great year in 22 or excuse me, last year, 23, and struggles in 24. So now it's like, was that an outlier? So definitely I'm with you. That's a great point about the questions. And, the 10-game lead, obviously, I think was just such a dagger too. And I think we all in the back of our minds thought that it wasn't over. But man, to like get to the last 2 weeks and kind of already be done with the season when you had a 10-game lead was so disappointing. But I think that was kind of the overall sentiment from everybody, was that 24 was just way more disappointing than 23. I was trying to think of reasons, and I'll throw this to you. I wonder if maybe a little recency bias, where it's like we just came off of 24, so of course it stings more. I was trying to think of reasons why 23 would be more disappointing. Do you have any? I couldn't really think of much outside of like, hey, they had a division lead in September. They didn't have that this year. That's really all I could think of.
Yeah, that's a good point, that we were in the division lead later on. Not real. I think 2023 from the standpoint, I think going into the season was maybe a little bit more frustrating because, one, you come off the playoff berth, you're hosting the All-Star game. So I was pretty disappointed in 2023, just at like the offseason they had, of like, how the heck do you have Tommy La Stella as your opening day DH? Like, you have this momentum, you have the All-Star game. Like, what are we doing? Why couldn't you spend, $10 million more to kind of remedy that situation? So I think that's, for me, maybe where 2023 is a little bit more frustrating, was just, you had so much momentum, and, going into 2024, some of that momentum was halted a little bit, I would say. That's the only thing I could think of, is just 2023 is really the season where some of the momentum was kind of put to rest. And I think some of that was unnecessary. I'd pin that more on ownership, honestly. There's just no reason to have La Stella as DH. To me, it's unacceptable. So that's where I'd probably say 2023 is a little bit more disappointing, but that's the only thing I can find.
Yeah, and maybe like, Jared Kelenic had that great April, and it was like, oh my gosh, he is developing into the guy, and then he drops off. So, there were definitely, and I think it just fit. 2023 was very disappointing, but I think overall 24 was just a more demoralizing season as a whole. And I think we all agree on that. Another question that was brought up during that chat, I think it was a subscriber sent it in to Jake, kind of mentioned like, hey, the Tigers get to the playoffs with a low payroll. So I don't remember the exact question, so I apologize. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but it's sort of like, why can't the Mariners get in? They actually have a higher payroll than the Tigers. And just kind of your thoughts on, is that something where that's Jerry Justin not doing the job right with a lower payroll necessarily? Or is it just kind of a fluky thing that, sometimes teams are going to get in the Rays, Tigers, Guardians, stuff like that. What's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. A couple things. I think, like, obviously the Tigers had a fantastic run to the end of the season, but I do think it was probably a 1 in 100 chance of them to pull that off. I mean, they sold at the deadline. So I don't think like what they did this season's necessarily a recipe for success for them. And honestly, I'd be surprised if next year they have a better record than we do, to be honest. I don't think they're going to be a bad team by any means, but I think they may be a year or two away from like a sustainable winner. And I could be completely wrong on that. And then where was I going with my second thought on that? It'll come back to me, but yeah, I think it's a little bit more fluky, definitely well-deserved, but like I said, not repeatable. Oh, I know I was going to say, I do think with some of these teams with low payrolls, I think it's always discussed, like the worst spot to be is kind of stuck in the middle, like whether it's at the trade deadline and you don't know what to do. So you kind of stand pat, you don't go for it, you don't add on. I think like a team for the Guardians and Rays are a perfect example of this. They know what their budget's going to be, and it's kind of bottom tier. And they have a process that works for them. And it's if a guy's a season or two away from free agency, they're going to cash him in for prospects. And I think that method or process can definitely work. But when you're stuck in the middle, it's kind of hard to do that in terms of like trading guys that are a year or two away. And then at the other side, you're not necessarily supplementing with free agency to fill those holes that the Rays or Guardians may fill with young prospects that they're getting via trades. Then I think the Mariners have kind of an additional complication where I think the last 3 years, Stanton's kind of promised one budget, and then when it comes time for free agency, he does something completely different. And I think that's a huge challenge as well, because it's really hard to plan for the future. So, yeah, I think the Guardians and Rays process definitely works, but you have to be very, very committed to it and make tough decisions. And when you're kind of one of those mid-market teams, you don't necessarily, have to do that, but I think you're putting yourself in a tough spot because you don't necessarily have the free agent resources to fill holes that pop up with not having enough, prospects that are major league ready that you can then, like the Rays will make sure they do that via trade. So yeah, I like I said, it's a tough spot to be in the middle for sure.
That's a great point. I don't think anybody actually brought that up in the group. The fact that like those teams know what they are and they know how to maneuver around it. They know like, hey, we're not going to be players in free agency. We're just not. So they have their plans in place and they're able to execute it. To your point, like John has kind of talked about, oh, we're going to raise the payroll this year and we're going to go up to this and this and this. And then it's kind of like we start getting our eyes on a couple free agents going, well, maybe they splurge here. And, I think we all kind of held out some hope that, hey, maybe they just weren't spending because they were going to go huge on Ohtani. I know pipe dream, but, I think all of us in the back of our mind thought maybe that was a possibility. So you're right. The Mariners are kind of stuck in the middle where they play a little bit of the free agent game, the Mitch Garvers, the AJ Pollocks. And I think that's an ownership issue. I really do. And that's a great point. Those teams know what they are. I know what they have to do. But I agree with you on the Tigers completely. A fantastic season. I mean, Tarek Skubal, probably the best pitcher, maybe in baseball. I think you can make that case easily. And a tremendous season. I think they've got some staying power, but yeah, I don't think it's like a sustainable thing necessarily. One point I made, I wouldn't want to get, oh no, that part of the video already came out, so I can say it. Listen, anything's possible. The Mariners could lower payroll next year and win. Their rotation's good enough. Julio could take off and have that season along with Cal. And sure, they could win, but you'd prefer to have a little bit of money to spend to kind of supplement the rest of the roster, essentially, would kind of be my thought to go on what you were saying there. Next question was, well, I'll get into the sleeper later, the sleeper trade candidates in a little bit, but what are you most excited for 2025? Been a lot of doom and gloom talk about 2024, and rightfully so. The fan base has every right to be extremely frustrated with this organization. But what are you looking forward to for the 2025 season most of all? I mean, a lot of offseason still to happen. Who knows? But as of right now, what are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think for me, it sounds like Edgar is going to be back in some role and maybe the most limited it would be is like not traveling on the road, which I mean, there's a lot of stuff he can do virtually. So I thought down the stretch, the offense looked way, way, way better with kind of some new voices in that room. So I'm excited to see if that can carry over in 2025. In particular, like, can Julio get off to a fast start and sustain that over the first month or two? Because if he can, I mean, we saw like Bobby Witt essentially carry the Royals to. I think Julio's that good to where with our pitching, if he, because like to your point, he's had a good month or two that kind of carries his numbers, and in turn is also, I think, kind of carry the Mariners, where you look at like WRC plus the last 3 years, they've been in a good spot, but a lot of that's been achieved in 1 or 2 months. I think that's a hard way to stack up enough wins. Like, you have to have some form of consistency over the years. So I think for me, it's just, with this kind of new hitting approach with Egger involved, can some of those gains that we saw late in the season carry over, or is it just a small sample size? So that's I think that's the main thing I'll be looking for early on. I was going to say bullpen, but I don't think Brash is going to be back till June. So I think I'll still have some kind of question marks moving forward. And I'd say even like with the rotation, like these guys are so good and hungry to get better. It seems like almost all of them add new pitches or something new in the offseason. So I'll be excited to see kind of how those 5 look coming out of the gates as well, because I mean, as is, they're all really, really good, the best rotation in baseball, but they've also shown that they're not like willing to just kind of rest on those laurels, that I think all of them are going to be hungry to get even better. So excited to see like what pitches, 2 or 3 or even maybe more of a mad next year. So I think those would be the 2 main things, like can hitting sustain and what's the pitching group going to roll out next year to get even better, if that's even possible.
Yeah, no, 100%. Actually, it's kind of similar to my answer. I'm excited about the coaching staff. A full, kind of off season for Dan and Edgar to get their hands on this team and see what they can do with it. So that's kind of my biggest, and it's something that I've talked about on my channel. Like, and I was pretty pro Scott Service, and I will still go to the grave saying like not everything with the team this year was his fault by any means. It takes the entire team, but I do wonder if they would have made that move a little bit earlier, because it really did seem, and maybe it was just a random sample, the team was just bound to play a little bit better eventually, but it really did seem like they just looked better with Dan and Edgar in the dugout. Now we'll see, what happens next season, but I'm definitely excited for the coaching staff. I do kind of want to go into the offense a little bit, because they do finish 12th in WRC plus. Again, I think me and you will both say that's not the end all be all. There's a lot of other stats. It's just something that we both like to use to measure, an offense ability with park adjustments and everything like that. And yet I'm still like, that's good. Like, if we would have said at the beginning of the year they finished 12th in WRC plus, I think we both would have been like, yeah, sign up for that. With this pitching staff, that should be good enough. Do you think there is something to like, how should I word this? Like, hey, the overall numbers ended up fine, therefore who cares where it happened? Or do you think there is something to the consistency of like, you can't keep having, and I'm kind of making up numbers here, but like, you can't have a 71 WRC plus, then a 180, then 68, then 137. Like, do you think there is something to that where they just have to find that consistency? Or is it, hey, who cares? You got the numbers at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think there is something to consistency for sure. Because I think the last couple of years in particular, they've kind of got to a spot where at the end of the year you look, I'm like, wow, that should be good enough, but it isn't. And I think it is. I mean, we even saw with Dan, it's like we had all these 1-run losses, but all the wins were blowout wins. I mean, because the offense was cooking. So I do think that they got to find a way to be more consistent. And there may be a month in there where they do struggle. I think that's true for most teams, but you can't have 4 months where, you're a bottom 10 team in WRC plus, right? They got to find a way to be at least average and more months than not. Because if not, you're just going to lose too many 1-0, 2-0, 2-1 games in the other months. And you're going to have a month where you blow out teams and your run differential, WRC plus look good, but you can only win 1 game a night, and it doesn't matter if you win, 10-0. So I do think that is a critical piece moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's something consistently that we all kind of agree on. I think Julio is kind of like the perfect microcosm of that for the team. I don't expect I don't know where they finished at WRC plus with their actual number, but let's say like 108. Obviously, not every month is going to be 108. Like you said, you're going to have months where you're a little colder and then months where you're a little hotter, but they've just got to find a way to make the bad months closer to average. And I really do think Julio's kind of the microcosm of that for the team. I mean, I think towards the All-Star break, he was running like an 86, 87 WRC plus, and you just can't have that. I know there's going to be moments where you're just struggling, but you got to get that closer to at least like 95, something that's a little more palatable. I forgot who made the point in the group. I think it might've been Ty from Locked On Mariners, another channel they should all be subscribed to. That what do you have, like 9 extra base hits at the all? It was something insane. Obviously he's providing elite defense and good base running, so there's value, but just kind of to me, the perfect microcosm of the Mariners struggles, not trying to put it all on Julio. It's never all on one person, but I really do. I'm with you. I think they need to find a way to get those bad months to be somewhat closer to league average. And then I think you're going to be in a better shape. And again, something I hope Dan and Edgar can focus on and help the team with. Obviously, a lot of talk that the Mariners might be trading starting pitcher this offseason. And listen, like the idea concept to me makes sense. They've got a surplus of great pitching, so why not trade a pitcher to get a good hitter? I'm not saying that's my stance on it, but I do get why that gets brought up. What's your thoughts on that? First of all, I guess I should ask, what pitcher do you think is most likely to be traded? And then do you think they should trade a starting pitcher this offseason?
Yeah, I think for me, so the 4 younger guys, I mean, there just is a limit to what teams are going to give up in any trade. And these guys have so much control left. And you look at like what a Corbin Burns got with 1 year left. And there's other examples of starting pitchers that were traded with a year or 2 left. And I think some of those returns are like the max of what a team's just going to give up. I just don't think it's feasible to give up more than they did. I just don't think any of them are close enough to free agency of the 4 that you would get like commensurate value for, what the other team's getting in returns. I think you'd be selling a little bit low unless one of those teams does give you, just an astonishing return. So for me, I'd like to see none of those 4 traded unless that's the case. So it leaves Luis Castillo in with his contract, and we know with our financial concerns, if you could free up that money, and I normally wouldn't advocate for Castillo being dealt, but we do have 4 really strong pitchers behind him. And I think like the teams like the Guardians, Tigers, Royals have shown you can get by without 5 really strong pitchers, right? And so if you could trade him and get a decent, a good bat back return and also free up payroll to get another bat or 2, it's something I think I would be open to. I think it would be, make good business sense. So I think but then he has a no trade clause. So it's tough to say like if he'll be traded, but if he was dealt for a good bat, I think it's something that would make sense. Not that I want him dealt, because I think he's a great pitcher, a great number 1 or 2. Would love for him to be back. But once again, just kind of seeing how even the Dodgers, right, they're running a bullpen game. Walker Buehler, who's got like a 5.5 ERA in the regular season. These teams are moving on because their lineups are good. So, and with kind of how starting pitching is being minimized and you can really beef up a bullpen and cover innings now, I just don't know if you really need 5, top end starters like we have. It's great to have, obviously. But yeah, if you could trade him, get a bat, free up payroll, I think it would make sense.
Yeah, and that was ditto for me. Castillo's the one that would make the most sense to get the contract, off. And then, I think you even brought it up once in chat to me, and we were talking about who knows, maybe you trade him somewhere you can kind of get like a back end starter in return as well to kind of offset it. 2 concerns I have with trading a starting pitcher, and I want to get your thoughts on it. My first is sort of this hey, trade the pitcher for the bat is kind of what it comes down to for a lot of people. My thing is and I don't know the exact WAR numbers necessarily, but let's say Castillo's worth 3.5 wins above replacement level and you trade for a hitter that was similar. Are you better? Yes, I get you have pitching depth, but you're still trading. It's still like a trade for you know what I'm saying? It's sort of okay, yeah, your offense is a little better now. Your pitching is a little weaker. And I do have a little bit of concern. You did make a great point about heck, even the Tigers did it this year a lot with the bullpen games, and Hinch talked about how it kind of threw offense is off. But I do have a little bit of concern because, like, I don't trust Emerson Hancock. You don't know about Brian Woo's health. I love what Bryce Miller did this year, but you look at the Savant page, there's still some blue in there. There could maybe be a little bit of a drop off. Not trying to go negative on all this, but all of a sudden then you trade Castillo now that the rotation doesn't quite look as, formidable. And it's like, how much better are you offensively with the trade? What's kind of your thoughts on that? Because that's kind of where I came at it. I kind of said, no, I do agree Castillo's the most likely, and I could stomach that trade for sure. But I just still kind of lean towards no. What's your thoughts on those 2 points?
No, it's a good point. And you're right. Cause like we've been pretty fortunate with pitching health. So yeah, if you trade Castillo and then if God forbid one of them gets hurt, pretty quickly your rotation could be in a spot of trouble. And so I think that is a fair point that, trying to keep all the depth that you can with pitching, I think just helps kind of keep the floor of the roster to a point where you're going to have a chance. And so, yeah, I think that is a very fair kind of consideration as they move forward in the offseason that, like I said, you trade him, somebody gets hurt, you could be in a world of hurt all of a sudden trying to put together 5 starting pitchers. So, yeah, very, I think, something wise to think about for sure.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, like I said, the point you mentioned, I think a couple months ago, we were talking about Castillo, that I think the best bet would to try to be to get, and I don't mean a back end starter like a Marco Gonzalez, but someone formidable that's maybe a number 4. I don't know how to, who knows what's a number 4 when we break it down, but someone like that at least, can kind of stabilize a little bit where if you do lose a pitcher, you still feel okay. Yes. About your rotation would be the best bet. But no, I agree. I think Castillo's the most likely. I could definitely stomach that trade, but overall, I'm still like, I kind of like, you got a great thing with the rotation. Don't mess it up. But again, this is where John Stanton comes into play a little bit when there's not a lot of options to do those things. So next question was kind of a fun one. I know we talked about it a little bit before coming on, but sleeper candidate the Mariners could trade for in the offseason. I won't give mine away that I mentioned in the show, but some really cool names came up. And put your Jerry DiPoto hat on. Who is your sleeper that you could see being a Seattle Mariners? Because we know they're going to make a trade. There's no way Jerry's not doing some trades at some point this offseason. So who is your kind of dark horse or sleeper trade that is going to be a Seattle Mariner in 2025?
I'll give a couple. So one would be Nico Horner from the Cubs, just because they have a prospect, Matt Shaw, who plays second or third. They already have Paredes at third, Horner at second. So if they think that Shaw's ready, I do wonder if they would make Nico Horner available. And then one that I'd be very curious on would be Josh Naylor from the Guardians. So he's a year away from free agency after this year. They've got Kyle Manzardo, who's kind of turned it on lately. He's a top 100 prospect, first baseman. So same position as Naylor. And then the Guardians, like we said at the beginning of the show, are one of those teams that kind of know who they are and how they have to operate. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility. And it kind of is aligned with their process that guys like Naylor that are a year away from free agency, they kind of have that young guy that's ready to step in, that they may, look at Naylor and say, hey, we need to trade for somebody in the rotation, for example, because we're limited there with Boyd gone, Bieber. I think they have 2 or 3 starters returning. So I don't know if the value would, if this aligns, but like maybe somebody like Logan Evans or Michael Morales or Brandon Garcia is kind of a headliner for Josh Naylor. I wouldn't want to give up a ton for him because he's kind of like a 2 to 3 WAR player, 120 WRC plus, but he is a guy that doesn't strike out, hit 31 home runs this year. That hasn't really been the name of his game in the past, but he's drawn walks, before that and got on base, hit for a decent average. So I think he's a guy that would hit in the middle of the order, cover first base for a year. And like I said, there's no way he should cost one of your top 5 starters. So maybe you can't, and maybe they do think that Logan Evans could step in the rotation for him, and maybe you get Evans and Naylor plus a prospect not at his caliber that's a starting pitcher but is closer to MLB to kind of help backfill that depth. So I think Naylor is the one guy that I'd love to see us pursue if the Guardians do kind of operate in the fashion that they have in the past and have to kind of capitalize and replenish with some young controllable players for him.
Yeah, that's a great call. And like you said, with the limited strikeouts from Naylor, and like you said, home runs really haven't necessarily been his forte, but 31 this year. And in T-Mobile, where as a left-handed hitter, that it is a place where he could hit 30 home runs in that ballpark. And listen, I don't know every guy inside and out, what kind of person they are, but he seems like a pretty good vibes guy too for the clubhouse. And we've talked about bringing in some of these guys with the playoff experience. I don't know if he'd necessarily be a cage guy, like you put it, but just a guy that's, he's in the ALCS right now, has a chance to be in the World Series, bring a guy like that over. And I think it would be a pretty good fit in this clubhouse to have Josh Naylor. So I really like that one. And to your point being, obviously there's give and take with him being a free agent after the end of next year, the fact that you get him for 1 year, but you could also get him a little bit cheaper possibly. So another name we talked about that you brought up, and I think Ty and Colby mentioned him as well, is Alec Boehm from the Philadelphia Phillies. Third base is going to be interesting. I'm actually going to ask you about Polanco in a minute too here. But, listen, Rojas overall, like WAR standards was solid, but listen, the offense was atrocious after April, is pretty much carried by defense. Boehm's an interesting name to me. He's always kind of struggled defensively, but had a pretty good defensive year this year. Could have been an outlier, but you have Perry Hill here, who's kind of been a wizard. I mean, Josh Rojas, one of the best defensive third basemen in the American League this year. What's your, and a pretty good offensive player too. I think 119 WRC plus last year. Don't quote me on that, guys, but something's around there. Thoughts on Alec Boehm as a potential addition?
Yeah, no, I like him. He's hit in the middle of the Phillies order. To your point, if Perry Hill can kind of elevate his defense, he gives us better production, or should give us better production from that third base spot than we got in the prior years. So yeah, and I don't think he would cost a ton either. So yeah, I think that's a name that'd be very interesting if available.
And yeah, I just know from some of the Phillies fans I know, they're pretty relentless on him. Now, I don't know if that's the overall vibe in Philadelphia about him, but could kind of be a nice change of scenery to him. Seattle's a little bit calmer than Philadelphia. Yeah. So not that we're not a frustrated fan base for sure, but I think he's someone that could kind of be a fan favorite possibly. Agreed. I should have asked this earlier, but Jorge Polanco, $12 million option. We've both kind of gone back and forth. And there was a point where we were like, yeah, I'd probably pick that up. And then no, where are you at on Polanco's option?
Yeah, I think you have to let him go. It sounds like there won't be a ton of payroll left. And I do think second base with Ryan Bliss and Cole Young's a spot where internally we have options that can, I would feel, who knows how they'll do, but I think they're decent bets to be, league average bats there. So I'd rather spend that 12 million on a first baseman or third baseman where, well, I guess, first base maybe Locklear. So third base or DH, where we just don't really have any internal options as well. And then with his knee surgery, he may not even be ready at the beginning of the year. So that kind of adds another, I think, thing to consider. So yeah, for me, I think it's a pretty easy decision to not exercise that option and allocate that money elsewhere and give Bliss a chance at second if we don't sign a second baseman in free agency.
Yeah, and you could even have Rojas over there at second base too if you do something at third base. And I guess my thing with Polanco, I'm with you. I'm a no. And if you really want him back, you could decline the option and then probably sign him for less. True. Too. So yeah, I'm a pretty firm no on it. I know some people, when they saw the injury news, were like, "Oh, he was hurt." To me, that's just kind of even more of a no because I don't trust him to stay healthy. Right. It's a shame. He was better than Colton Wong and Adam Frazier offensively, but I can't say yes to it, especially when, this team's got Mitch Haniger's contract and I'm sure he's going to accept his player option. And I just can't justify $12 million to Jorge. If we had Dodger money, I'd probably say sure. Cause if he gets hurt, whatever, who cares? But John Stanton doesn't. So I'm a no on that as well. Anything else you wanted to go over? Any comments, thoughts you had in our first, I guess, off-season video for the Mariners?
No, I think that covers it for today. So yeah, I think after the kind of World Series ends and we see what player options have been picked up and declined, we'll do kind of an off-season show. But no, that covers what I was hoping to discuss today. So thanks for having me on.
Anytime. And anybody watching, please head over to Twitter. Give MarinersSUR a follow. I'm telling you guys, the best Mariners account on Twitter to follow. Easily one of the most knowledgeable Mariner fans out there, and realistic and down to earth, which is great too, because sometimes there's some very hot takes that can be fun, but a little out there. So MarinersSUR is definitely one of the best follows on Twitter. And yeah, to anybody listening, we are going to, after the World Series, kind of put together our off-season plan of what we think the team should do. I guess we'll kind of we'll talk about it more, ourselves, but we'll kind of, maybe combine our plans and see what we can come up with to put these Mariners in the World Series in 2025. So appreciate you coming on, man. Always enjoy our conversations. Anybody listening, remember to like, comment, subscribe. Channel members, I will have my NFL picks out on Friday. I forgot to get my Thursday night pick in, but I will have my picks out for channel members. So look forward to that for the weekend. Have a great night, everybody. And as always, go Mariners. Peace.